same place too. And to make a long story short, what we have is over 40 years of denial and evasion, which I finally realized there was a way to overcome. And in engineering the approach of that means of overcoming this denial of representation, I developed this worldwide mandate for mathematically perfected economy and absolute consensual representation. So this is, as I adamantly see it, an indispensable legal instrument for asserting our individual rights to, in fact, monetary solution. Our problem is, can we agree on what that is? What principles by which would we do so? And so if we were to revise these points to what I resolved them to a long time ago, we could understand how each of these things translates to a ramification of the obfuscation of the promissory obligation. And then we can understand how the world today would be different if we adopted this solution, which is what I call mathematically perfected economy. And I might mention that likewise I engineered a method for immediately and transforming any of the present systems in the world today into mathematically perfected economy, even virtually without cost. So, in other words, we're 30 years ago plus, I engineered a means which is still applicable to rescuing Iceland from its current situation with a stroke of a pen, and in fact by this mandate. So one thing that I would hope you could do is candidly evaluate it without any introduction, and then we could discuss this further, how it solves your problems. But as I go down your list of points, burdening deposits, it talks about interest, how much interest there will be. It talks about inflation. It's, again, irrelevant. Interest is necessarily eradicated in your solution because all we're doing in mathematically perfected economy is we're restoring the right of the individual to issue their own promissory obligation free of exploitation. So we do this through a common monetary foundry which makes no profit on this obfuscation of the currency. You understand, under this so-called central banking system, just for example, if it cost $1 to publish $100,000 into circulation, then for a $100,000 house for which we might pay $300,000 of interest over 20 or 30 years, the banking system launders for $1 launders $100,000 of principal into their possession plus $300,000 of interest, or $400,000 altogether just in relation to the house for $1, meanwhile increasing the related sum of artificial indebtedness to $400,000 because it was necessary to reborrow all that to maintain the same circulation so that we could continue servicing that debt and then the further debt, which this $400,000 sum of artificial indebtedness comprises at the end of the term of that house. And this is happening in relation to anything and everything that is financed by this obfuscation, and everything eventually has to be financed by it because in order to justify further assumption of debt to maintain a vital circulation, you consume all the collateral in existence to borrow enough to maintain a circulation until the system collapses. So this burdening deposits thing is irrelevant too. Creation of money by private entities. Now, the only private entity that ought to have the power to issue money is the people. It's through their promissory obligation. This creation of money by private entities or parties relates to this belief in a lie that the banks are actually issuing our money. No, we are. They only can issue that debt when we intend to assume one, and all that they're doing is issuing the evidence of the debt on their paper. They're saying, no, Mike, you can't issue your promissory obligation on your paper. It has to be issued on our paper. So for $1, we collect $400,000 from you, and you will have a $400,000 debt at the end of that time period. Okay, interest-free money creation. I'm the original author of this idea. The world has been convinced of this now because of 35-year essays that I've had out, which prove, for instance, there's no distinguishing thing between interest and usury. And basically the idea of interest-free money comes from this thesis of inevitable failure that I published so long ago. Inflation is determined, your fifth point. Well, there's no inflation at all under mathematically perfected economy because it and it alone maintains a perpetual one-to-one-to-one relationship between remaining circulation, remaining value of represented property, and remaining obligation. So there's no inflation is irrelevant too. Pension funds and mortgages. Here it gets a little bit interesting because the way that mathematically perfected economy relates to this is in the transformation to mathematically perfected economy. Basically, what we do is we refinance all debt under mathematically perfected economy, counting all prior payments of interest instead toward principal, which is the right thing to do because it's as if you had a lawsuit for damages and you reverse the damages. That's what this transformation does. It reverses the damages of having paid all this interest, which is unwarranted and unjustifiable. So this itself, nonetheless, it's not a radical idea. It merely reverses the damages of a fatal crime against us. And in so doing, it would eliminate most of the debt in the world, and any remaining principal would be paid at the rate of consumption or depreciation of the related property, actually then reducing in general the cost of servicing a fraction of the current debt in what would remain as debt under mathematically perfected economy. The payments are generally about 1/12 as much. In other words, a person here pays a mortgage for a $100,000 home with a 100-year lifespan under mathematically perfected economy. Instead of $1,000 a month, it would be $1,000 a year under mathematically perfected economy. 1/12 as much. Traceability of capital. Well, under this Common Monetary Foundry, all capital is traced. So there's no issue there. It's already resolved. Referendum on state borrowings, point 8. Here's another one. Because everything, the state issues its money the same way that people issue it under mathematically perfected economy, the state is subject to certification of its creditworthiness, which prevents the state from overspending. And then all of the measures in this mandate that I sent Thor force the state to account for exactly how the payments are going to be made and exactly what just methods of taxation justly tax people for consuming actual necessary state spending. But all these things are financed under mathematically perfected economy. There's no interest, so there's no multiplication of state debt, and the rate of payment is equal to the rate of consumption by those who consume of it. So we've resolved taxation and state borrowing, which is not state borrowing. The proper concept to understand is the state issues a promissory obligation also, which isn't really to go in debt. It's a commitment to pay for things as you consume of them. So you only actually become in debt when your payments might be overdue. But as that is all automated through the Common Monetary Foundry, this wouldn't even happen either. Largely mathematically perfected economy is implemented by software. So you wouldn't even need currency under mathematically perfected economy, but a country can opt to use currency. It matters not to me. Mathematically perfected economy is the principles that we have to abide by, which is to maintain a circulation which is always equal to the remaining value of represented property, and this is maintained only by eradication of interest and our obligatory schedule of payment. Now, 9, information accessibility. Well, what information is necessarily accessible is always accessible under mathematically perfected economy, because if you study this mandate, we force, as a matter of creditworthiness, to prove how something is going to be paid. And in the case of the state particularly, where this is important, we're forcing the state to comply with certain ways of financing it and its operations. And in truth, government does little for us. Mostly it creates problems in the name of resolving problems. Government itself is a lie across the world. And what we're doing in this mandate is we're forcing government to be accountable. Now, restraint, transparency, and education. The education that's necessary are these principles, the only principles of monetization. Restraint is incumbent upon the method of certifying creditworthiness, and transparency we've already discussed. So there's a resolution of your 10 points as basically as I can answer to each of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fair enough. But the main problem, of course, for us would be to get such a system going here in Iceland. And I've sometimes talked about this with politicians, and they seem to so keen on to honoring financial obligations. And,
well, let's consider exactly what those obligations are. Do you play the game Monopoly in your country?
We often use it as a metaphor.
Okay, well, it's an evil game. But suppose in the game Monopoly, I, Mike Montagne, built you, Thor Einerson, a house. And we had one player who actually didn't play with the rest of us. They never produce anything. They never give up anything of value. And that player sat off to the side. And every time we made a transaction like this, we created money to monetize the ownership of the properties on the board. And you want this house not for investment or exploitation purposes yourself. You want it to live in it. All right. So I build it, you buy it, you issue me a promissory obligation to pay for the $100,000 house over its lifespan at the rate of consumption. I'm paid in full. I'm the real creditor. I've given up property. This other person sitting over at the table, we'll call them banker buddy. Okay. Now banker buddy says, "Oh, no, you can't issue that on your paper. I have to issue the paper." So he rips another page out of his notebook and he writes $100,000 on it, and he gives it to Mike, the real creditor, and he says Thor owes him a house now. He produced nothing. He gave up no lawful consideration, and all of a sudden the debt is to be paid to him, whereas in fact I'm the creditor. I've received the money. The debt is to pay the money out of circulation, in which case it's retired. So if we had an entity off to the side which actually served our purposes in upholding this inherent nature of a promissory obligation, it wouldn't be a debt to that person. They might collect the money, but retire it from circulation. Paid principal is the property of no one. And so this mandate actually proves this fact. And this is the crime. Now, when you go and you ask a politician,